Hello everybody and welcome back to a brand new video. We just hit 42.2k subscribers. Let's get to 43k. Please like this video down below and subscribe to my channel before we get started. And I have to talk about what I'm going to do in this video. It's going to be an alternative history video of the 1960 election. What would have happened if Richard Nixon edged out a victory over John F. Kennedy in the 1960 election? How would today be different? How would subsequent elections be different? It's something that I've wanted to do for a very long time and talk about. I know I'm going to get a few comments from the leftists in the comment section that are going to say, oh, you're just doing this because you're avoiding the news because Blumph down in the polls, this, that, and the other thing. And I'm going to talk about that. I actually wanted to do a video on the polls today because there is a lot of good news for the president, but I wanted to get this video out because I've been talking about doing it for a few weeks and I finally have completed what I believe the sequence of events would be. So without further ado, let's jump into this. But first, a message from our sponsors over at Raid Shadow Legends. Want to be the hero of your own fantasy? Enter the epic world of Teleria, where the Dark Elves meet the Sacred Order and the Banner Lords are in an endless war with the undead hordes. Collect, equip, train, and upgrade your team of heroes in order to start a journey of a lifetime. Raid Shadow Legends will take you to the world of dark fantasy and realism, and it is free to play and available for both mobile and PC. I like the fact that the gameplay is fun, the gameplay is easy, and there are a lot of battles. And by the time you're watching this video, the brand new Tag Team Arena should be live in-game. The Tag Arena is the next level of competition for PvP battles. Instead of a single 4 vs 4 battle like in Classic Arena, it's actually a series of 3 4 vs 4 battles. It's the best of 3. Whoever wins 2 battles wins the series. It's basically Arena on hard mode, and since it's brand new, the developers will be giving out special rewards soon to whoever manages to finish high up in the rankings. So if you're like me, and you love truly competitive PvP with some big rewards, you're going to love Tag Arena. So what are you waiting for? Go to the video description, click on the special links, and you will get 50,000 silver and a free Epic Champion as part of the new player program to start your journey. Good luck, and I'll see you there. Alright, so now let's get started. Let's talk about the 1960 election. What would have had to gone different for Richard Nixon to beat Kennedy? It's mainly he would have to prepare himself properly for the first debate, make his appearance a lot better because optics are everything. We know that the polls showed Nixon winning on the radio, but the vast majority of people that watched it on TV and got to see the debate said that Kennedy overwhelmingly destroyed Nixon. That kind of hurt him. So he lost the election in several states by less than 1%. So it's important we give some of the close states to Nixon, assuming that he would get his act together. And even though it is widely speculated that Nixon possibly did win the popular vote in this election while losing the election, he did very well in the popular vote either way, but he did lose by like 50 to 60 electoral votes. I would assume that the states that would flip in this election would be Missouri, Illinois, Hawaii, New Mexico, and New Jersey, some of which were called for Nixon, by the way, on the networks. There's a big famous graphic about Hawaii getting called for Nixon, and he never ended up winning it. So Nixon could have won the 1960 election. It was a very close election, and I would assume that in this reality that he would. And speaking of events that would have subsequently happened, the Bay of Pigs would have been a success as Nixon and Eisenhower planned how to do it together. So Nixon would have known how to pull off the operation a lot better, and their plans of attacking Cuba would have been a lot more successful, and Nixon would be successful in overthrowing Castro. There would be no Watergate in this scenario. Because that came after Nixon lost the first time, and that came in the 70s when he got involved with a little bit more corruption. And also, Barry Goldwater would be largely irrelevant. He would have stayed in the Senate until he died. Ted Kennedy also would not have become senator because it would have left a bad taste in a lot of Democrats' mouths. The fact that you would have seen Nixon end up beating Kennedy would have made their influence a lot more reduced, would have reduced them to like the Udall family, for example, their senators, congressmen, but really no presidents or anybody with any presidential aspirations, or at least serious contenders. So the bottom line here is that Nixon would have passed the Civil Rights Act in 1963. However, it would have been a lot more moderate. He would have outlawed segregation, but would have been a lot more moderate in nature. It would not include busing. It would not include forced integration. And Johnson would have been the nominee in 1964. Nixon, in this scenario, Nixon would have actually beaten Johnson, as you can see here on this map. Johnson would have done a lot more better in terms of winning the South. He would have been a little bit more opposed to civil rights, but not too much. But enough to the point where there would not have been some sort of third-party challenger. And in this case, Nixon would have beaten Johnson. 400 to 138. Johnson would have done well in the South. Nixon would have done well in the North as well as California. And as we can see here, the black vote would have stayed around 30% for Republicans. It would not have changed much up to this day. Maybe it would have gone down a little bit. Johnson would still win the black vote because of the government assistance factor, and he would have done very well in Washington, D.C. as a result. So still in this reality, no Republican wins Washington, D.C. It stays with the Democrat Party. In terms of the legislation that would have happened subsequently, the Voting Rights Act would have passed under Nixon. No Hart-Celler Act would have passed, which means that the American demography, the change in American demography would have been much, much slower. The current American electorate in this case is roughly 83% white, unlike the 70% it is today in the current timeline. And because there's lower amounts of immigration, wages are likely higher for the American workers, as Ted Kennedy, proposed the Hart-Celler Act, or was at least one of the biggest proponents of it. He's not a senator. We don't even know if Nixon would have signed it in this reality. Also, there's not going to be a Great Society Act, but there might be a more moderate form of Medicaid or welfare that passes under Nixon that's a lot more efficient, but at the same time does not incentivize family breakdown. Lyndon Johnson ran on social programs in 1964 in this reality as well, but he lost. But Nixon decided to compromise a little bit on the economic issue with the Democrats, and he was able to pass some moderate and more efficient proposals in terms of Medicare, Medicaid, and welfare. And this would have probably been a lot easier on the economy as well, especially in the long term. So in this reality, Robert Kennedy is not shot in 1968. As I've said before, the Kennedy dynasty has been reduced to about the same level as the Udall dynasty. Like, you have senators, congressmen, maybe people with governor aspirations, but no serious presidential candidates anymore. In Nixon's second term, he does win the Vietnam War. He deploys troops to Laos, which is what Eisenhower would have wanted to do. And as a result, Vietnam becomes more capitalist. The Soviet would lose a key ally, especially after China loses leverage. And the Soviet Union will collapse sooner than it does in the current timeline. Also, anti-communism will be a lot more popular in Congress and public. Conservatives still have a lot more control over things like academia and the media in this reality. And also, there is a downside to this for the Republicans. There is a post-war recession. And in this scenario, it does cause the Republicans to lose in 1968. Ronald Reagan does win the nomination, but he loses to Hubert Humphrey, which runs a lot more of a moderate campaign this time around. He picks a Southerner to be his running mate, which helps him galvanize support in places like Arkansas, Mississippi, Alabama, Tennessee. Potentially, he could have picked Al Gore Sr. That's why he could have won Tennessee. He would have defeated Ronald Reagan in this scenario, but Reagan has a lot more political aspirations. Obviously, Reagan's still young. He's still bright in his mind. And Humphrey, in his presidency, he appoints 4 more liberal Supreme Court justices, so that's another downside for the Republicans because they won't be able to control the Supreme Court, which controls a lot of the social policies in this country in terms of our justice system. But the good news is that Reagan will have a much better shot to win in 72, as Humphrey failed miserably in his unsuccessful attempts to denuclearize. So as we know, in 1972, Reagan wins decisively. He defeats Humphrey. He wins California. He wins a lot more of the South this time around, as Humphrey leads a little bit to the left as he was expected to lead. Reagan wins decisively. He wins up in the Northeast. Also in this scenario, Vermont does not break its streak of voting Republican, as it broke its streak in 1964. Vermont will continue to vote Republican. I think it started in 1852 or 56 all the way up until I think the late 80s as well. So the streak of Vermont is not broken like it was in reality, as there's no Goldwater. But Reagan wins in 1972. He wins significantly. Humphrey wins just 2 southern states in this reality. One of them is home to his VP pick. In terms of California, Reagan wins that decisively, being his home state in 1972. And it's a fairly red map, as you can see here. And we do know that Reagan will win in 1972, but he'll also do well in terms of the economy, and he'll win in 1976. Ronald Reagan, with 381 electoral votes, will defeat Jerry Brown, the governor of California, which was ironically the governor of California up until January of last year. He served multiple stints, but he did run for president in 1976. He was a lot more protectionist, a lot more anti-immigration, things like that back then. And Jerry Brown would have won California, would have won some Midwestern states, but Reagan was popular. He cut taxes. He still would have won by a fairly big landslide, probably by 8% nationwide or something like that. A little bit different than in our current reality where he destroyed Mondale. But Reagan does win in 1976. He gets to serve a second term as president. And the taxes will be cut more in the late 70s, but Reagan will have a stagflation problem. It's going to cause the economy to tank a little bit. Democrats are going to win in 1980. John Glenn will be the nominee of the Democrat Party, the moderate, I believe, senator who was from Ohio, who was an astronaut. He does fairly well. He wins California. He wins a lot of the Midwest and upper Midwest, and he's able to end up winning against George H.W. Bush, who was not Reagan's VP, but still ran for president in 1980. He would run in this reality as well. He would lose, and I believe that Glenn would have a mediocre presidency. Bush would run again in 1984. He would win in 1984 against John Glenn with Bob Dole as his running mate, as we can see here. And the Soviet Union will collapse in the early part of Bush's term, which is going to be very popular for Bush, and Bush would end up winning in a landslide as John Glenn would attempt to pull a Grover Cleveland and do so massively unsuccessfully, winning only 4 states as well as Washington, D.C. Bush would win 493 to 44 in the 1988 presidential election. But much like in reality, we have 1992 rolling around, and you have a very popular young governor out of the state of Arkansas, rising star Bill Clinton, who also picks Al Gore for VP, running against Bob Dole. Ross Perot is not relevant in this reality, but Republicans not exactly super popular. Dole's a very weak candidate, and Bill Clinton would win this election cycle by a very decent margin. So, as we know, Clinton would serve as president, but he would lose popularity leading up to the 1996 election, as the media, which is far less liberal in this timeline after Republicans tended to do better in terms of maintaining ground in the educational system and the media, when Nixon won in the 1960s, the media would expose him this time for being with some underage girls leading up to the election. Earlier, before the election, the 1994-95 peso crisis in Mexico would lead to a massive spike in illegal immigration. NAFTA would be a proven failure in this case, and America is a lot more populist and protectionist, which leads the Republican Party to turn to none other than paleo-conservative warrior Pat Buchanan, who narrowly wins the primary and is able to hammer Clinton where it hurt after the scandal breaks in late October about Clinton with the women. And Buchanan was unpopular at the start. He said some controversial things, as we know, but he led America into prosperity. He builds the wall completely, which at the time is known as the fence. He promotes traditional values. He also hunts and kills bin Laden, leading up to the 2000 election. And this helps us avoid 9/11, and it also helps Buchanan win over some of the more neocon wing of the party. The Iraq War is also averted in this instance. There's no 9/11. So in 2000, the voters will reward Buchanan, and he will defeat Al Gore in a landslide. Also, the Gore campaign would move to the right of where Gore was, but still it hurt him at the same time because he lost a lot of the far left to Nader, who overperformed his 2000 total by threefold in this timeline. So not a whole lot changed in terms of 2004 because you still had Texas Governor George Bush going up against Senator of Massachusetts John Kerry. In this scenario, Bush would have won 290 to 247. I'm assuming that there was one faithless elector in some state in this scenario. But in terms of that, Bush would still frame Kerry as a flip-flopper. The economic recession also leading up to 2008 after Bush wins is not exactly as bad as it was in 2008 without the Iraq War, but it still exists in this scenario. And a lot of people are blaming Bush. John Edwards is leading the polling by a giant margin, especially in the Rust Belt states as the auto industry begins to collapse a little bit. But still, there's a big scandal that comes out about him cheating on his dying wife, which did happen in our current timeline. And John Edwards would lose by a decent margin in the 2008 election to Bush by, ironically, the same margin as 2016. except Bush would lose the Rust Belt. Bush would actually win California as well as New Mexico, Colorado, even though it's 2008, because demography is a little bit more favorable. There's a little bit less of the Hispanic population, and since there's probably a little bit less of the Hispanic population, they might be more inclined to actually vote a little bit more conservative in this scenario. So that's going to help Bush win states like California. Obviously, as you know, states like Colorado, New Mexico, Nevada stay Republican in this scenario, even though the Democrat Party is a little bit more moderate. Those states stay with the Republican Party because demography is more favorable in this scenario because the Hart-Celler Act of 1965 never passed. So we can look at this and we can see the fact that Bush won, even though he wasn't supposed to, because of the scandal. And people are going to be asking me, well, where's Hillary? Where's Obama in this scenario? Wouldn't they have competed for the 2008 nomination? But Hillary Clinton is irrelevant in this timeline because she was simply the first lady to a disgraced, perverted president. And Obama is also irrelevant partially because he would have been less inspired to join the Democrat Party to begin with, as the racial stigma of black Democrats is far lesser in this timeline. And with LBJ's destructive welfare reforms not being in the picture, the black community had a lot less of a need for community organizing and is much better off financially. Obama is currently a very successful attorney in suburban Chicago in this timeline, but he has no aspirations to run for office, and in terms of politics, he remains a swing voter. So in 2012, as we can see here, after Bush wins another term, it's kind of a boring term, but people want to change. They want to change from the 16 years of Republican rule, rightfully so. And the independents decide to go with Andrew Cuomo, supporting him as he beats Rick Santorum in this election cycle. To give some background information, Andrew Cuomo ran for the 2002 governor election because he saw it as much more winnable without 9/11. He beat George Pataki narrowly, and it was a midterm way for the Democrats, especially because there was no 9/11. And he's the Democrat nominee. He wins by a substantial margin, as you can see here, and he'll have Bob Casey be his running mate out of Pennsylvania. And in 2012, Mitt Romney does become the Republican nominee. He chooses Marco Rubio to be his vice president, and Cuomo ends up beating him narrowly, 272 to 266, as the economy continues to roll back a little bit, but things will start to slow eventually. Romney was the senator of Massachusetts after becoming governor in this reality, partially because Ted Kennedy was not in the picture at all. So in terms of 2020, which is where we're at now, Bob Casey is currently the VP. He's running for president. I expect him to lose to Marco Rubio after the economy has kind of slowed down a little bit. Marco Rubio is going to win by a 377 to 161 margin in this scenario. So it's kind of weird how this thing really turned out. You go from a vastly different reality to this reality. Republicans still maintain competitive in terms of not necessarily minority voters, but in some of the Western states that are currently Democrat, their black vote total is probably around 20%. Compared to where it is currently at 10%. Democrats are probably a little bit more moderate as they have a lot more moderate base to reach out to in terms of the demography of America being a little bit different. The Hispanic population is much smaller in this reality as well. So it's very interesting to look at how these things really panned out, and it seems like the Republican Party may be stronger off as a result, but the Democrat Party also will maintain being competitive in certain parts of the country. So what do you guys think? What do you guys think would have happened? Do you guys have any other alternative histories to my alternative history? You guys can let me know with the comment section below. But anyways, guys, thanks for watching this video. Please like this video down below, comment down below, and subscribe to the channel. Hit the bell for notifications so you never miss another video. Follow me on social media. Join the Patreon or subscribe. Star links in description. As always, guys, thanks for watching. Red Eagle, out.